Professor Ariely spends his free time working on a guide to the kitchen and life, right? Dining without crumbs, the art of eating over the kitchen sink. But when he's actually at work, he studies the irrational ways in which we make decisions and behave, which makes him the perfect partner for the last conversation. Shalom, Dan. We should say that you're a professor of psychology and behavioral economics in Duke University, one of the leading scholars in the field, the author of two bestsellers, Predictably, Irrational, The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions, and the later one, The Upside of Irrationality, recently translated into Hebrew, לא רציונלי, אבל לא נורא. זה שם הספר האחרון. Dan was born in New York and raised in Israel. It was here in the youth movement, בנוער העובד, preparing כתובת אש, a fire sign that Dan was badly injured by an explosion. The burns covered 70% of his body. He spent 3 years in the hospital. We'll talk later, if you want, on the linkage between your personal experience and your academic work. But first, give us the basics. You say that we often know what has to be done and we do the opposite?
We don't always know. I think some of the audience here represented how little we know. But the interesting thing is that even when we know what's right, it's very hard for us to do. So this comes to mind mostly when we have long-term goals and short-term goals. And it's often the case when we think about something, we know what we need to do. We know we need to save for retirement. We know we need to change regulation. We know at some point we'll have to make some agreement. In the short term, it's something we don't want to do. And the interesting thing is that we live day by day, and because of that, we just don't take the right sacrifice.
Basically, it's like homework.
It's like homework. Good in principle, not good for today.
And the more complicated the decision is, the less rational it will be?
So sometimes more bigger decision actually makes it harder. So think for yourself. How long would you spend to look for a digital camera, for the right digital camera? Not a big decision. Think about how much time would you look for it, and then think about how long would you spend looking for the right spouse, a significant other, and ask yourself whether proportionally it's correct. And most people recognize that we don't spend the right amount of time looking for a spouse compared to how much energy we spend on little decisions.
But when it comes to politics, and I'm talking now about this decision-making of the electorate, of the public, perhaps we don't have to be rational. We have to be emotive, intuitive.
No, so there's this whole debate about how good our intuition is. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote a very popular book called Blink. And I think he unintentionally misled lots of people. So if you read this book, you would come to the conclusion that your intuitions are really good, that you can just have your gut intuition and it tells you something. It turns out that you have to read the last part of the book to realize how bad intuitions are. He doesn't start with it, and most people don't read the whole book. And it turns out that if you think about it, under what conditions would your intuition lead you straight? Under what conditions would your gut feeling be correct? And the conditions are really quite strict. You have to have lots of experience. You have to have direct and quick feedback. You have to try many different things and see it. So in sports, you get it. You try to shoot a basket, and you try different versions and so on, and you get immediate, accurate feedback. In politics, you get very little feedback. In the stock market, you get a lot of feedback, but very noisy. So the conditions under which we can develop kind of a good intuition about what's the right thing to do are incredibly restricted. But nevertheless, we have incredible confidence. The real puzzle is the overconfidence. People have ideas about how the world should work. People have ideas about how to educate people. People have ideas about what's a good regulation for the market. Think about it. I'll give you little examples. Forget the big examples. Both Bush and Obama in the US gave about $140 billion in tax rebate to people. And they gave it in slightly different ways. Here you are spending $140 billion trying to reinvigorate the economy. And how do they do it? There's lots of ways to give money. You could give it in checks. You can give it in cash. You could give it... How about a prepaid debit card with Obama's face saying spends the government money? I think this one would work the best. But when it comes to regulation, people have an intuition about what will work the best, and they just implement it, even though it's incredibly expensive and not very effective.
But when we come to think about it, what you do is precisely the same. You presume to know how we should make decisions.
So first of all, always try to base our conclusions on data, which is different from intuition. And experiments are really a great way to contrast your feeling of what will happen with what really happened. And experiments don't always work the way we want, but having data and using that data as a basis for a decision is very different in nature. And what's interesting is time after time after time, the results from experiments don't fit with the natural intuition, especially with the economic intuition.
Tell me about the time you were most surprised by the results of an experiment.
I think the most surprising experiment for me was the following. We asked people for the last 2 digits of the social security number, Teudat Zehut. And people gave us their number. Mine is 79. You know, you could do whatever number. Okay, so people wrote this number up, and then we gave them a list of products. Some computer accessories, some wine, some chocolates, and so on. And we say, if you translate the last 2 digits of your social security number into dollars, $79 in my case, would you pay this amount, yes or no, for each of those products? People say yes, no, whatever they wanted. And then we said, okay, now let's bid on those items in a real auction. You're participating in an auction, somebody would win, somebody would pay, people bid for it. And we found the winners, they paid, they got the product, and then we calculated the correlation between people's social security number and how much they're willing to bid, and the correlation was about 0.5. Now this is very strange, right? Why would somebody's social security number dictate how much they're willing to bid? It turns out that it's not about the social security number. It could be your shoe size, it could be the weather, but once people make up their mind once, would I pay $79 for this bottle of wine? That thought stays with them and linger with them for too long. You can also think about this as our political opinions. Once we make our opinion once, we're kind of committed to that opinion. It lingers in our mind. We say to ourselves something to the effect, if I made my opinion this way, it must have been a fantastic decision. Let me just repeat it again. No need to revise our
Like the soccer
decision.
team that we like.
Like a soccer team that you like a political opinion that you like a job that you take, all of those things basically, it's the role of the initial decision and then follow through. So, you know, this is kind of a biblical example, but if the idea was that God punished the people of Israel for walking 40 years in the desert to kill a new generation, I think if there's any wisdom in that, but if there's any wisdom in that, I think is that once we have our opinions consolidated, it's really hard to change it. And getting a new generation is actually incredibly useful.
You pointed to Israelis. You have the privilege and the experience of watching us from within and from without and living on both sides of the ocean. Is there something distinctly different about the way Israelis make their decisions and behave on day-to-day life?
So I'll tell you one personal observation and one data observation. My personal observation is that somebody told me that Israel is really good in programming, but you never want to give them a really big programming job. Like if you wanted somebody to do a new operating system, you don't go to the Israelis, they don't document anything, you can't really get all the details. But if you want hackers, then you want to go to Israel. So this is not data, but I think it's an interesting analogy. In terms of data, we do lots of experiments on cheating. We give people a chance to steal money from us. We give them a sheet of paper with 20 questions and we say, solve as many as you can, we'll give you $1 per question. You have 5 minutes, go. People go ahead, they solve as many of the questions as they can. When they finish, we say, take the sheet of paper, go to the back of the room, shred it, and then come and tell us how many questions you got correctly. People do it, they shred a piece of paper, they come and they tell us that they solved 6 problems. Now, we actually played with the shredder, so the shredder only shreds the sides of the page, but the main page is intact. Yeah, I know, we're cheating.
It takes an Israeli to invent that kind of experiment.
We dive into it, we find the sheets of paper, and we find out that people report to be reporting to be solving 6 problems, they actually just solve 4. And lots of people cheat by 2 questions. We have very few people who cheat by a lot. We have lots of people who cheat by a little bit. So as an Israeli, I wanted to run this experiment in Israel. So I ran it in Israel, both in the Technion, in the Beersheba. And I'll do a little quiz here. How many people here think that the Israelis cheat more than the Americans? How many people think the Israelis cheat less than the Americans? Okay, they cheat just the same in this particular version. By the way, I had a Chinese friend who said, come to China, we'll show you cheating. No, they cheat just the same. An Italian colleague, they cheat the same. The Turkish cheat the same. We have more countries to go through. But here is what we think currently about this, which is, I went to an Israeli university. I also know cheating in Israeli universities. I know it's different than when I teach in the US. But I think what happened is that when we do the kind of cheating we do in our experiments, it's detached from any social context. It's kind of test the pure people's ability to both cheat and feel good about themselves. Kind of a fudge factor of a little over the line, but not too much. And that's the same across people and across culture. And I think that what culture do is they take activities in a particular domain and shift it in and out of the moral domain. So is cheating on your spouse, cheating or not cheating? Different cultures have come up with different answers on this. Cheating on your income tax, cheating or not cheating? Again, different cultures have come up with this. So I think that basically we're the same, but culture kind of operates on top of that and makes some change. I will tell you one, this is I only test in America, I really want to test in Israel. We did find one cultural difference in the US. We went to a bar in Washington, D.C. We do these experiments in bars across places, and we tested congressional staffers and to see how much they were cheating. And then we went to banks in New York City, and we tested bars next to bars and checked how much the bankers were cheating, and we saw a difference. So who do you think cheated more, the politicians or the bankers?
They say the bankers.
We'll get a vote. How many people think the politician cheated more? Bankers? Oh, wow, very good, yeah. So the bankers cheated 2-1, twice as much. But it's important to know these were junior politicians. You know, they maybe
Which brings me down to the last part of our conversation. It has to do with, you see that some things have to do with your personal experience, and you testify yourself that your personal experience had an enormous effect on your life and on the choices that you made. Do you still remember the moment of the explosion? Can you decide not to remember?
So I remember a lot. I remember kind of vivid pictures of not every day, but lots of the moments, lots of the treatments. Some of them are quite painful. Actually, writing the second book, I wrote about more personal stuff, and it was painful to remember.
When one reads the description of the bath,
yeah,
and the ripping off of the bandages, and the treatment, the daily treatment, and knowing that it will come back tomorrow, even the description is painful. And I'm asking if you sometimes wish that you wouldn't remember, that you didn't.
No, I don't think so. You know, it's painful. It's painful to write about. It was painful to edit, to reread it so many times that I did. You know, I have lots of pain still, not as big, but I have daily pain, and I wish I didn't have that pain. That would have been nice. But the pain from memory, and again, I wish I didn't have that pain, but once I had it, I don't think I would have done something to erase it. I don't think that's, I would have liked that. It does give me perspective. I think differently about life. I think differently about small obstacles. It has, you know, at least I try to make myself believe that I have some advantages out of this. But I don't think I would have erased that.
And you spend your life dealing with decision making. Do you still remember a decision that you made during these few seconds when pains, surprisingly enough, were not as bad as they will be later, yeah, and you had to come out of the fire?
Yeah, I do. So I got trapped.